and how we can model this, as well as software development. So let's begin. Today, organizations are more competitive when they're able to make quick and effective decisions. They're under constant pressure because they have the competition, they have the consumers, and on top of that, technology changes all the time. And they're constantly trying to keep up. Better decisions can be made when the impact on the organizations, market, and consumers are more visible. That's one of the things we believe why it leads to bad decisions, that these things are not visible to organizations. And profound knowledge helps with better decisions, and we call it system of profound knowledge. And Dr. Deming has given us this system of profound knowledge. What do we need to have for a system of profound knowledge? We need to have appreciation for a system. Then we need to have knowledge about variation, which we went through this morning, and Brian has demonstrated that to us. And then we need to have theory of knowledge. And, of course, psychology, probably the least looked at element of the SOPK, the psychology of people and how people interact with each other and how people behave and think. So every decision that is made with regards to some objective. The decision maker is influenced by the perception of the environment. You're only bounded with the information that you have available to you. If you don't have the information, you cannot make decisions based on the information that you do not have. And because of that, the quality of the decision you make is determined by the limits of this perception and the information at hand. On top of that, if an organization constantly ignores the environment it is in, it will ultimately cease to exist. So you cannot really go against the environment that you're in. You either cease to exist or you need to find another environment that is more suitable to you as an organization. So let's look at the systems and subsystems of it and how they are related. Dr. Deming describes a system as a network of interdependent components that work together to try to accomplish an aim. And that is important. An aim is what the systems is trying to accomplish. And each of systems elements is connected to every other element, directly or indirectly. And that is very important too, because no subset of elements can be independent from each other. If the subsystems or the components of a system are independent, then they're not part of that system. They have to interact with each other because it's the interaction that brings the value, not the subsystems themselves. So, each of these subsystems are also a system onto themselves, and they will have their own subsystems too. I know this is a bit, when we see the model, hopefully this will make more sense, but think of it as a big system having a little systems within itself, and each of them having little systems too. It's one of those little circle graphics that go on forever. So each subsystem will actually serve the main system that it belongs to, but they will have their own aims as well. The subsystems will have their own aims, yet that aim that they have will be in line with the main system's aim, because no subsystems can have an aim that goes against the main system's aim. If they do, then they're not part of that system, and they will actually create chaos and disconnection and everything else, which actually, unfortunately, happens more often than we think. So let's go through an example. Let's say that we have a space program. We want to land some people on some other planet. So let's see how we can create this space program as a system. First, we need to have a spaceship, and I'm going to really simplify this space program. I'm not going to go through all of the million elements that it has. We're just going to have 3 programs. One of them is, the first one is spaceship. We need something to take us to the planet, right? So, okay, we're going to build a spaceship, After that, we're going to have an astronaut training program because we actually need somebody to fly the spaceship to the planet. And then we will have some kind of a communication system because we need to be able to communicate with the astronauts while they are flying. So each of these components, the spaceship, astronaut training program, and the communications, is a subsystem of the space program being the main system here. All of these subsystems, spaceship, when you're building spaceship, it will have its own little subsystems as well because they will report to this main system. So each of these subsystems need to know, integrate, and understand the aim of the system that it is serving because it needs to adhere to the standards and policies of the main system. So each subsystem will also need feedback from the other related subsystems to stay on course. If the subsystems do not talk to each other somehow or do not know what each of them is doing, as we will see, we will demonstrate this with the model, then you cannot talk of a system. It's just chaos. So let's say that with these three systems, we have an astronaut selection and training, communication system, and spaceship construction. If we do not pay attention to the system and the aim of the system, we may start all three of them almost at the same time. But this will be wrong, because if spaceship construction takes longer, and it will, let's say that it took 10 years, if we start the astronaut selection right now, by the time the spaceship is constructed, our astronauts will be older, technology will be different, and so on. So basically, we would have wasted incredible amount of money and resources on astronaut program while we do not need to. So then what do? We actually start the astronaut selection and training later, and this is because we're thinking it as a system. We know when the spaceship program is going to end, and we know how the astronaut selection and training program will be related to that, so we start later. However, that training program will not sit idle. That's why I put the little purple at the beginning. That training program will still need to talk to communication system and spaceship construction because they need to also work on training the communication system. They need to say, hey, this is what the astronauts will need. We need the training manuals for the communication systems and so forth. So with that in mind, it will be necessary for us to look at this and decide when to start what. So because of that, as Dr. Deming says, management of a system requires knowledge of the interrelationships between all components within the system and the people working in it. If you ignore this fact, your system will fail. So we said a system cannot exist without a name, and management needs to make sure feedback loops between subsystems are utilized. That's great. They're utilized. But how do they do this? They need to help communications between those subsystems to reach their destinations. We said these subsystems will need to talk to each other. Well, somebody still needs to manage that communication. And management is that hub that organizes that communication. They kind of act like a router, make sure that the related messages go to the related subsystems. So this helps with collaboration between the subsystems, and with that we will have much more structural, much more efficient organization, so to speak. One thing we need to look at is everything that needs to be done to achieve what I have just said is considered a cost. Every action that you do to make sure that the collaboration is there, the communications are there, and all that is going to cost you something. It's going to cost you time, it's going to cost you money, it's going to cost you resources. Sometimes just one of them, sometimes all three of them. And there may be other costs that I haven't even thought of. So for example, in our space program example, budgetary pressures may dictate that some functions not to be included in the spaceship or communications program. At the time, it will seem okay because our budget did not allow this and we cut this functionality. it will only be very expensive, and we will only realize the effects of what we have not done when we need that functionality, that we just cut off. So if you, to give you an example, if you cut off a functionality that provides real-time communication between the astronauts when they landed on planet versus, let's say, delayed communication, delayed by 2 hours because it's cheaper and budget just allowed that. When the astronauts need to communicate with you in real time because they're in some kind of danger or they're in some kind of emergency, then the cost of such exclusion will become very apparent to you. And these costs are not measurable because, one, it may never happen, and that's one of the, I think, dangers of the organization, why the management can make these decisions that I will take a chance kind of deal. There's a chance that it may never happen. If it happens, you're in trouble. But because they're not measurable, then when we're modeling the system, the aim of the system, we need to implement PDSA cycles. With those cycles, then we make sure that these unmeasurable costs and lack of appreciation of a system by top management will not get us into trouble. And also, with the PDSA cycles and the collaboration, we will make sure that there will not be any competition between subsystems, because that's another important thing, especially when budgetary constraints are thought of. And if you have competition between subsystems, that will lead to the demise of your system. So we said each subsystem will have its own PDSA cycle. If you look at this paragraph, you can see each of the circles at a separate PDSA cycle, just expanding the boundaries of the PDSA cycle within itself. So it could be a subsystem that is reporting to another subsystem that is reporting to another subsystem, but because they all have PDSA cycles within themselves, it's kind of even the outer, the blue big circle will have all of the PDSA cycles implemented by the time it has that information. So the aim of the system, with this PDSA cycles intact, the aim of the system may, in some circumstances, require management to decide on some of the components to operate at a loss. And this could be acceptable to you because they still serve for you to reach the aim of the system. And they could be less than efficient in traditional terms. I believe Dr. Deming talks about that, giving free food in a cafeteria to employees. So with that one, it will be a cost to you. It will not gain you anything, but that's an unmeasurable benefit. I wouldn't say cost, unmeasurable benefit that you will end up having much more happier employees at your hand. And we can apply this to our space program as well. So let's say that for our space program to be successful, we need to attract the best minds in the world, right? So to accomplish this, we may want to give them better housing, higher living standards, and other incentives for the employees and their families that may be needed. Now, cost accounting will probably go against us. They will say, no, this costs too much. We cannot do this. There's budgetary constraints and whatnot. But management at this time has to behave by theory and not by numbers. And they need to believe in the theory that this will lead to recruiting better minds in the world that will ultimately recruit to better results for the whole project. So with this little introduction on the systems and subsystems, next what we would like to do is we would like to look at the aim of a system and what that means for us. For a system to be valuable, it needs to produce a result, or in other words, provide a value. Throughout the organization, there needs to be an agreement on the aim as well. If subsystems or any other parts, humans do not agree on the aim of the system, that again will not go well as an efficient organization. The aim of the system sometimes may require management to change the boundaries of the components and therefore redefine them. And this is important because every system has a boundary, and you determine these boundaries. These boundaries are not natural. Actually, management defines them. So you have to define where these boundaries are, and therefore you have to get the information at hand. Otherwise, everything that we do will go to the universe level, because that's the ultimate boundary we can have, infinite. And it's also utmost importance not to wait until a crisis or problem arises, or merely react to circumstances to define the boundaries of a subsystem, as these boundaries are our own making. So in other words, we should not wait until a fire comes up, and we should not be just putting out fires. That's why the PDSA cycles are so important, because they hopefully, implemented correctly, they will warn us about the fires before they happen, or when they are very small, that we can put them out. When they're bigger, they're going to be more expensive, they're going to assume more resources, and sometimes we may not even be able to put the fire out, and all we can do is damage control, let it burn and see what we have left. So in order to avoid falling into this trap, which means not to wait until a crisis occurs, a systems approach to the aim is needed. That's what we feel. We feel like, hey, if we took a aim of the system and look at from a systems approach point of view, we wouldn't fall into this trap, that hopefully this model is correct, that it will warn us about the things that are about to happen. And it will give us some kind of predictability to the future. This is not forecasting, as we are against forecasting, but this is more like seeing the interactions and how our decisions will interact with the market and the consumers and the customers, and let's see if it can provide us some kind of value or guidance. So everything a system does has to be in line with the aim of the system. We have said this. Awesome. But when the changes are made in an area, particular area, a holistic approach can prevent adverse effects in other areas. So this is important too. Not only can we see how our decisions affect outside customers, outside world, our decisions also affect the inner organization subsystems as well, which leads to sometimes sub-optimization. We can try to optimize one subsystem, but that will be the demise of other subsystems. And hopefully this system, this model that we're about to present, is going to help us understand that. So if you look at the aim of a system, from a systems point of view, we have to understand that this does not speed up the feedback loop delivery at all. But it does help with the prediction and foreseeing of the decisions and their impacts. I wanted to say this because I don't want to put false hopes into people's minds. So feedback loops are a whole different thing, and we're going to look at them and we see how it's implemented in our system. And since no such system survives long without the supported subsystem, we need to look at it from a holistic approach point of view. So we said that in order to understand the effects of decisions on subsystems and the system itself, one needs to have profound knowledge. Dr. Deming's system of profound knowledge provides a very clear and concise way of doing this, for gaining this knowledge. So if you take the system of profound knowledge as the system, so this is the main system, then we will determine its aim to gain profound knowledge. Our paper and model will be a subsystem of that system. And our aim, of our model's aim, will be then to create, to clarify and define the first point in that SOPK, which is to create a constancy of purpose. So with that small introduction and going through the systems and subsystems a bit, let's look at how we model the aim of a system. We said everything starts with an aim. Without aim, you don't exist. You need to have a purpose. You need to have an existence reason, a reason for existence. So the aim of the system in our model is a constant and everything will be connected to that aim, as we will see. This aim is the reason why an organization exists. We have to also determine, there are some other aims that we need to talk about, but we don't call it aims. So you have day-to-day or year-to-year objectives, and we refer them to as goals. And then you have smaller, shorter period objectives or purposes, and we call them as objectives, sorry. So as Dr. Deming said, the aim of the system must always relate to a better life for everyone. It must always lead in some way to some kind of improvement for all the participants. And this is very important. If I have to give you an example, for example, let's say there's a company out there with the aim of providing best film for photographers. Well, this company could be in trouble, and I think you know who I'm talking about. We have seen this happen lately. This company will be in trouble when people start taking pictures without a film, without the need of a film. So that aim has to be correct as well. Or at least you need to respond to the changes. You need to be agile in determining that aim. They determined this aim probably when they were founded 100 years ago, and they did not change from that. And that was maybe the mistake. But maybe they should have changed their aim later to help people capture their memories and enjoy them for years to come. That will be a larger definition, and maybe with that mindset, they would have had a more chance. So that company didn't survive the shifts in technology, but hopefully if they were using our model, they would. So let's see. Then we have culture, and this is the corporate culture. It follows on the heels of the establishment of the aim. The aim usually is determined when the organization, and I'm talking about man-made organizations here, not the natural ones, is determined when the company or organization is established. Then we get culture, and culture is the folklore of the system. The initial culture of any organization is usually determined by the founders of that organization, and that's just a given that what we have. And culture and aim are related, and they're both slow in changing by nature. We believe that changes in culture happen much more rapidly than changes in aim. And again, we have seen this happen in some of the companies. I don't want to give any names, but one of the companies, they had a change of top management, and while the company was working okay, they didn't feel like it was, and they introduced stack ranking to their employees. That totally destroyed their culture. And it was such a big change, which in the next slide I'm going to talk about. It was such a big change that it actually reset the whole company's infrastructure, so to speak. They lost more men to their biggest competitors than before. So now they're in bigger trouble, yet unfortunately they don't know it yet. So the culture of an organization is continually defined and redefined by people in the system. And this is why we say changes in culture happen much more quickly than aim. Because culture is defined by its people. And your people, you're constantly getting new generation of employees, new generation of top management. And I think we can agree that each generation has a different view on the world. They use technology differently. So they have this cultural gap between the management before them or the employees before them and themselves. And they are constantly going to be defining the culture. And maybe 40 years ago, 50 years ago, customer service was not that important, although probably if Dr. Deming was here, he would smack me one. But it really was not at the time. Now it's more customer-centric. The organizations are valuing customers more. Even though they don't practice it, at least they say it. So that's maybe an improvement too on its own. But all this makes the culture of the system dynamic. And that's why we say it changes more quickly. And as I just said before, radical changes in top management and their policies actually resets this model. And this is actually a game changer. So culture has an impact on behavior. We're just building our model. Behavior is basically how your people, the elements that make up your organization, and that's mainly your people, how they behave. They behave according to your culture. They are not going to behave with disrespect to your organization. They're not going to behave outside of your organizational culture. If they do, chances are the organization will do its best to get rid of them. If you're a company, if you're an organization that does not value, again, quality, if you're a manager who's trying to implement quality, sooner or later you'll probably get fired because you are going against the organizational culture. Or the opposite is true too. If you're an organization that values quality in everything that you do, and then you're somebody who doesn't, who's always careless, providing defects and all that, again, the organization will do its best to get rid of you and probably will do so. So it will make life harder for that individual until the individual either obeys the organizational culture or leaves. So behavior, we said culture impacts behavior, and then behavior impacts ideas, how the generation of ideas are done. And as we build this model, you will see that it's actually inspired by Dr. Deming's production viewed as a system diagram in his book. And the generation of ideas is impacted by behavior. We said they're closely related, and it's sometimes difficult to define the boundaries between them. But if you look at the system, it will reveal these boundaries to us. To give you an example, ideas generated in an organization which has a micromanagement behavior and culture will be very different than the ideas generated in an organization that has more of a collaborative culture and behavior amongst its people. So that's why we say the ideas are impacted by behavior, which is impacted by culture. And it is at this level that we start to see now how external components start to play a role on the next levels of our model. Up until here, we were all within the organization. But now when we go to the next, we realize that we also have customers. And our customers are the end users of our products and services. Mind you, when I say customers, if you were looking at outside customers, that will be your end users, but it could be also internal customers as well. Customers can be anybody, really, as long as somebody is using the services or the products that you're providing to them. So we have customers, and then we have customer research and feedback. And this is the surveys and questionnaires, social media, the feedback that you get. Or sometimes you send, hey, can you take a 5-minute survey? We all get these emails. It will take you 30 seconds, and 10 minutes later, you're like, I wish I didn't click that button. It just the way it is, but we collect feedback from this. And sometimes it's automated too. There are now, we have the technology to actually track people as they visit your website and see where they click and how much they spend on each page, and therefore determine. And that's part of the research and feedback too. And at this point, when I say customer research and feedback, what we have to pay really close attention is the unsolicited customer complaints. Unsolicited customer complaints are your best customers because they value your product or organization so much that they take the time of their day to call you or to write to you to give you their feedback. That's something they're not happy about. And this is really, really valuable. This is where you actually get most information from these people, because these people are passionate for some reason about you or your product. When I say you, organization or the product, and they want you to do better. And this is important for that. So when the things are great, when everything is working as expectedly, everybody is happy. Nobody has any complaints, right? The real culture of the company or the organization is tested when things go wrong. And this is how a company wins or loses advocates. It's at those crisis moments, and every product can be defective at some level. Every software can have a bug, but it is those moments, how you behave, how your culture is tested, determines if you win or lose more customers or more people. And these obvious issues, when they happen, how you behave, again, fuels the consumer perception. Now, consumers are, in our model, is the outer world. They're not necessarily users of your product. Customers are the users of your products. Consumers are not the users of your products. However, they are the people that are aware that you exist. If they do not know about your organization, if they never heard of it, they cannot have a perception of your organization. But if they know about you, your services, or your products, one way or another, they will have a perception of you. And this perception is usually affected by judgmental and social values too. It could be a little tweet that you put, and it could be affected by, it could affect the consumer perception. Yes, sir.
It can also be affected by their misconceptions of you. They know who you are, they've heard something about you, but a rumor has been circulated.
Yes, correct. When I say consumer perception, I don't mean it's always good. Yeah. It's bad, it could be bad as well. It's, you could be somebody, I can give you examples, we're very big on palm oil usage, for example, because the palm oil companies destroy the trees and the rainforests and all that. So our perception is not to use any product of any company that uses palm oil. So that's a perception. But as you said, there could be a company that says that is actually not using this palm oil, but their competitors, we call them trolls now on the internet, they could be spreading rumors that, hey, this company uses palm oil, for example. And in that case, of course, I will be affected. Now, as a consumer, I may or may not research more into that. Then it is up to the organization, unfortunately, to track, to monitor these misperceptions, as you put it, and make sure that they are corrected.
Sometimes you can't correct it.
Sometimes you can correct it. Sometimes they are true, then you just spin it, as they do. Most of the time.
You're not talking about what you do or I do. Right?
Yes, yeah. True. So in our model, consumer perception is just as much responsible for the generation of ideas as is customer feedback. We said behavior has an impact on how the ideas are generated in your company, how the innovation is made. But consumer perception also has an impact on how you generate ideas, because you are aware of what people are thinking about your organization, as well as your own customers, what their feedback is. And this can lead to improvement of your products, or maybe if you have a bad consumer perception, you may decide to go a different way and produce a product that will have a positive impact on the consumer perception of your company. Some of the automobile companies do that. If they have a consumer perception of being cheap, let's say, they may go up and acquire a much more expensive brand to increase that, to have a positive impact on that consumer. And how the system reacts to this consumer perception is, again, determined by its culture. And then we have the design and redesign after the ideas. And this is where the ideas are generated in big numbers, and then some of them will actually make sense that they will turn into design and redesign of the prototypes. And each of these design and redesigns have PDSA cycles in them by nature, because you have to design something, test it out, and if it works, improve it. If it doesn't work, you have to, again, improve it. And at this time, design and redesign, consumer perception does not play a major role anymore. because that was for the ideas. The ideas are generated with a little bit of impact of the consumer perception. But once you go into the prototype area, that now you're developing a product, consumer perception plays very little role. It doesn't have as much impact. Now your own customers are important to you, that the research and feedback is important. And again, it is very important to adopt a PDSA cycle in this initial design and redesign phase, as we see. So because our model is to the right, our PDSA cycle goes the wrong way. So this is anti-clock.
You're the other side of the equation.
Yes, yeah, true, yeah.
Our toilets flush the opposite way.
That's great. So this PDSA cycle makes sure that customer research and feedback is continually studied with a reference to the consumer perception and then acted upon in the redesign phase by incorporating the results from the study that we have. So once we go through this exercise, the final redesign of the generated idea becomes the initial design of your product. So your first version of your product is the last version of your prototype, always. And from there on, the products and services have their own design and redesign stage as well. This needs to happen because once you release a product, you immediately go into improvement, or you should go into improving it and getting feedback from your customers. And this time it is the customers. However, now the tables have changed a bit. Customers, when they were giving you feedback, as we can see, now we have another PDSA cycle here, and this is because the feedback, the nature of the feedback has changed. So this PDSA cycle is very different than the PDSA cycle we had at the prototype level. Right now, the stakes are higher. So this PDSA cycle is much more slower in revolution, as we will see in the next slide. The reason for that is you have a product, your customers are using it. Once you have a beta version of something, the feedback you get from people is much more forgiving because they know this is just a prototype and they're giving you feedback. Once you have a product that they paid for, the feedback is harsher. They're not that forgiving anymore because they paid you money for those services. So because of that, this PDSA cycle is very slow in revolution. However, if you fail to implement this PDSA cycle at this level, the cost of failure is even bigger. So you need to have this. We talked about managing consumer perception, and this directly feeds into that. Again, how you behave. You could have released a very buggy or very defective product, which escape from you. That's possible. It's, we're all humans, we make mistakes. Organizations make mistakes too. What determines the consumer perception is how you behave when you find out that defective thing. Are you gonna hide it? Are you gonna try to hide it? Or are you gonna be honest and try to fix it, basically? So with that, the product, its purpose and its aim must be aligned with the aim of the system, and it should be constantly tested. It's best to integrate this into the culture of the organization, because then you don't have to constantly worry about it, and your people will have this in mind, no matter what they do. And feedback loops from consumers and customers form the study part of an even larger PDSA cycle that encapsulates most of the system. We use PDSA cycle a lot, almost at every stage, because we believe in them wholeheartedly. So now let's look at subsystems. How do we determine our subsystems? Well, our model is fractal in design, which means that every subsystem has exactly the same look and feel of the main system. But How does a subsystem know that is in line with the main system? Or where is the feedback loop from the main system come back to the subsystem? What we do is we actually replace the further right with the subsystem. Now, where the customers were is your parent system. Where was the customer research and feedback is your system feedback. And the consumer perception is replaced by organization perception. So those purple parts are the main system giving feedback back to the subsystem. And that's how the subsystem knows where it is at all times. And again, because of this, the subsystem can implement another PDSA cycle that makes sure that it's always within the lines of the aim. So next, I know that we have 7 minutes. I want to look at 2 examples. One of them is education of a person, and the other is software development. So education of a system, we're just gonna, of a person, sorry, we're just gonna focus on the adult life of a person. The reason is, up until we reach some ages, we actually do not know what we want in life. And in primary school, high school, and all that, usually the education is determined for us by our parents. We don't have much of a say. So in our adult lives, we have a bit of a say. So the culture is usually the social and family background, and then we have a behavior that impacts on ideas. And when we say ideas in the education of a system, we talk about our person, we talk about interests and talents of that person. And then design and redesign is the schooling and training of that person. So this has a further, if the aim of a person is to be X, all this have an impact on him, again, just as an organization. The culture, the social background has an impact of the aim of that person. The reason being, in some cultures, being a doctor or a lawyer can be valued a lot. In some cultures, hey, you have to go into military. Or your family background, we're a family of engineers all around, so you need to be an engineer, or a family of doctors historically, so you need to be a doctor. So it has an impact. And then the feedback with the customer and consumer perceptions comes in the form of from your families and from the society as well. One thing that impacts this a lot is the talent. If a person has a talent for something that is so great, it usually resets all of this, and it can bypass the culture and everything. So if you have a talent for drawing or music, then you can become a musician. However, sometimes there's a price to pay with that. And just as an organization, in the last design and redesign part of the system, in the further schooling, sometimes even if you have something in college, you graduate, 5-10 years later, you decide that what you have gone through, the education that you've gone through is not for you, and you want to change a career. Just as an organization, and your aim changes, just as an organizational aim, change of aim is very costly, that will be costly to you too, because you need to retrain yourself, and then you have to start a new career path. So with that, we will just go into the software development. Software development is kind of the same. The culture is inherited from the organization. Behaviors is the management style, and the ideas of the new software projects. And that culture and the management style still affects how the ideas are generated. And software development is basically a product development where the specifications can change frequently. At this point, we do ask for software departments to adopt more agile approach to everything that they do, so they can respond to changes that are coming from the main organization. But just as before, your end users, the company, the organization that you're working on and all that will give you the feedback, and that determines your PDSA cycles. So if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. This was said by a very smart guy, Sun Tzu, I think about 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, and I think it applies to what we have just said. And the aim of this whole experience or the model is to know yourself as well as to know your enemy. What are your enemies? Basically, the inefficiencies in the company, the bottlenecks that you have, the culture, and that could be your enemy too, because you constantly are in fight with it. You will have people that will work in different ways in your organization. So a system is never the sum of its parts. It's the product of its interactions, and that's what we are trying to do with this model. We're trying to look at interactions and how things affect each other. And the management is the router, I said at the beginning. The management is the one that is the umbrella that sits on top of these subsystems, make sure that they're in line with the aim of the organization, as well as the organizations, the subsystems talk to each other. So they relate that information to each of the subsystems. So Dr. Deming said, you need to have an appreciation of a system. We hope that by implementing a model like this, you can put the pieces of the puzzles together and you can have an appreciation of a system and how things interact each other. And you never lose the sight of your aim, nor fail to respond healthily to feedback, because you know what the cost of not responding to that feedback is. And we believe that the result will be a collaborative and learning organization that respects and exists for its customers and aims to provide the highest value. And we believe that's a win-win for everybody. And last, what we want to do with this model. Well, the road ahead is, hopefully maybe next year, we want to explore a bit something called bounded rationality. And we want to go into decision making. And we want to go into even why do managers make irrational decisions, even though they have the information at hand, the right information at hand, but they still give irrational decisions. Why does this happen? We want to look into that a bit. And there's a guy called Herbert Simon, who's a Nobel Prize winner with the bounded rationality theory. If you can look into that, that's where we will be going next. And with that, we hope that it will move us from constancy of purpose to adapting the new philosophy, which this will be the new philosophy itself. Thank you.